While we were in Guatemala, the first and only phone call I made home was to my mom. I wanted to talk to her about how what I was learning and experiencing in Central America was affecting the way I viewed the world. In the middle of the hour-and-a-half conversation, I could feel a little lump in my throat as I told her I knew I had made the right decision by joining the Gap experience at St. Norbert and coming to Guatemala. I talked about how it felt like I was meant to be here and everything had finally fallen into place for me. This trip taught me about myself and how the choices I make influence people around the world, demonstrating a worldwide network of communio between the whole human race and developing my global citizenship. Living in communio is when everyone lives as one, respecting one another and taking responsibility for our actions. It was not until the Guatemala trip and learning about the way coffee farmers live that I took a deeper look at the way my life choices are influencing others. Western society holds high regards for possessions and owning the most and newest model of things. Growing up in the United States, I fell into this way of thinking and living. I remember when I was younger, my parents would go to Starbucks every day for their daily cup of coffee. This consumeristic mindset drove many of my decisions before the Gap semester. One of the activities we participated in while we were in Guatemala, a coffee tour, was very eye-opening. We went to Andres' field and house to learn about the coffee process. The process of coffee, from preparing the field for planting, to harvesting the fruits, to processing the beans, is a very long and tedious process. This process also requires many hands to complete, and many farmers hire more workers during the harvest season. It is not a one-person job, but takes a community. Each step has to be done just right to produce specialty coffee. The coffee farmers of Guatemala know the importance and hold high standards to the coffee they produce and sell. These humble coffee farmers take lots of pride in their work. Andres taught us the important lesson of always putting care into each task you complete, but also to make your work enjoyable. It struck me how much love and care each farmer put into their work. The farmers have lots of joy for the work they do, and many of them who we encountered shared their passion with us. The tour put into perspective the amount of labor, love, and care that goes into each cup of coffee. In the US, we consume such large amounts of coffee, and most of us are ignorant as to the work and process behind it. It leaves me wondering how many other things I consume follow the same amount of work and impact the same amount of lives. Living with the farmers and immersing into their daily lives gave me a glimpse of how 7/8 of the world's population lives. Even with their style of living that would be considered less than in the United States, the families we encountered were grateful for everything they had and were much happier even with less possessions. When materials are not placed in a higher regard to humans, it leads to a greater sense of communio. Having less material belongings leads Guatemalans to value their communities and families over commodities. My host family and many other farmers who we met shared how grateful they were for the opportunities provided for them because of coffee farming. I always took for granted having a good education, having commodities like hot water, and having two parents who had good jobs to provide necessities as well as luxuries for their children. Working with Della, farmers are able to send their kids to school and help them get a good education. Living with my host family taught me about this opportunity and many others the coffee co-op provided them. Their access to a good education is very important to these families who wouldn't otherwise have these opportunities. I learned that by making choices to buy artisan and fair trade products, I am able to align my values with the values of the industries which are valuing the maker of the product and their families. Because these industries provide a living wage for the producers of the product and their families, I am providing a better style of living to people in Central America and around the world. While I was in Guatemala, we learned about the history of the internal conflict and how it is still impacting lives today. We learned that the U.S. government's choice to overthrow the democratic Guatemalan president led to a 36-year civil war. During the war, the United States also made choices to play a key role in the Civil War by providing training and resources to the Guatemalan military. Indigenous people fighting for their rights were marginalized during that time. I have learned the impact the United States has had in the past on other countries and how their influence still continues today. Many people don't believe that their choices have an impact on people across the globe. However, it just takes looking back at this one example in history to prove them otherwise. Political choices matter, and it is important to realize when voting how United States leaders impact others inside and outside of my country. Voting someone into office who has the same values as me is important, such as voting for someone who recognizes the importance of advocating for marginalized people. I have learned how my choices, both big and small, buying local merchandise as well as political choices when voting, have such a big impact and affect people other than myself. While in Guatemala, we took a trip to the capital to meet with HOS, an organization that came after the Civil War to advocate for human rights and truth. We got a walking tour of the city to see some of the work they are doing to bring attention to the injustices of the Guatemalan government that occurred during the Civil War and are still happening today. One of the posters HOS put up to bring awareness to human rights violations says, "You touch one and we all respond." This poster really stuck out to me, and I still find myself reflecting on it often. To me, the poster means no matter who it is, if someone's human rights are violated, then the whole human race should stand up for that one person, whoever they may be. HOS is exemplifying a preferential option for the poor, and through their work, building a wider community. During our meeting with them, this exchange was had upon sharing stories that really gets to the core of what comunio and preferential option for the poor mean. We are them, and you are us. Through Guatemalan history, voices of the marginalized poor have been silenced. Organizations like HOS work towards a change to allow for these individuals to share their stories and to be heard. Extending compassion and solidarity to persons across the globe goes a long way in working towards a more connected human race. If everyone lived with that mentality on a global scale, the human race would be an unstoppable force living in communio. I have always struggled with making choices because I am always worried about making the right one. Previously, I knew my choices and actions had effects spanning across the globe, but I chose to ignore them and go about my daily life and do what was convenient to me to avoid making difficult choices and recognizing I made the wrong one on a global scale. I wish I could snap my fingers and change the world. Unfortunately, it isn't that easy, but fortunately, I am ready to work harder to make a difference. The trip to Guatemala opened my eyes to thinking about how my choices affect others around the world. Having an outlook of being a global citizen, being mindful of my own consumption, and looking out for each other as members of the human race is essential to a more connected human race, living together in communio. I know how I will respond, but how will you respond?
And if we fall, let's be strong now. Moving along, we don't mind.